Money did not begin as coins. It did not begin as trade. And it certainly did not begin as something people chose freely. Money began as a record of debt. That idea alone challenges everything we think we know about economics. Because if money didn't emerge to make exchange easier, then it must have emerged for a different reason. And that reason wasn't convenience. It was control. Today money feels natural, almost invisible. It sits quietly in bank accounts, moves digitally across borders, and dictates what we can and cannot do. But this system wasn't some organic evolution of human cooperation. It was built deliberately, layer by layer, thousands of years ago. Understanding how money truly began forces us to rethink power, debt, inequality, and the role institutions play in shaping our world. It reveals that finance was never neutral. It was designed from the very start as a tool to measure obligation and enforce hierarchy. And that design was first perfected in ancient Mesopotamia. If you stick around, you'll uncover a truth that's rarely taught. You will see why barter was never the foundation of our economy. Why debt existed long before coins, markets, or banks. And how the earliest financial records weren't about trade, but about control, a system that in many ways still defines our modern world. The first major insight comes early, and it completely overturns a story we've all been told, the barter myth. For generations, economics textbooks have repeated the same simple narrative. Early humans traded goods directly, but barter was inefficient, so money was invented to solve the problem. It's a neat story, but it's completely unsupported by the evidence. No anthropologist has ever found a society that operated on pure barter. No archaeological record shows entire economies functioning through the direct exchange of goods. What we find instead is something far more complex and human: systems of credit, obligation, and delayed repayment. In early communities, people didn't just swap goods with strangers. They lived among relatives, neighbors, and clans. Exchange was social, not transactional. If someone needed grain, they were given grain. The expectation wasn't immediate repayment, but future reciprocity. This worked because memory mattered. Your reputation mattered. Your obligations mattered. But as societies grew larger, memory was no longer enough. When communities expanded into cities, obligation had to be recorded. This is where Mesopotamia enters the story. Between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, agriculture created something revolutionary: surplus. For the first time, grain could be grown, stored, and redistributed on a massive scale. And once surplus existed, so did the problem of scarcity. Someone had to decide who got what, and under what conditions. This led to the rise of temples, which became the first true economic institutions. They were not just religious centers. They were administrative hubs, warehouses, courts, and banks all rolled into one. Temples stored the grain. They issued rations to workers. They advanced seed to farmers before the planting season. And in return, they expected repayment after the harvest. But this repayment didn't require a physical exchange on the spot. Instead, the obligations were recorded. Scribes used clay tablets, pressed with wedge-shaped symbols, to track how much barley or silver by weight someone owed the temple. These records were not money in the modern sense. They were ledgers, the world's first balance sheets of obligation. This is the moment money is truly born, not as coins, not as trade, but as accounting. Debt came first. This is the second major revelation that comes from understanding Mesopotamia's economy. Before markets existed, before prices fluctuated freely, before currency circulated, debt already structured society. A farmer didn't need to have silver in his hand. His obligation existed as an entry in a temple ledger. That clay tablet itself carried immense authority, because the institution enforcing it was real and powerful. Once an obligation could be recorded, it could also be transferred. Once it could be transferred, it could be inherited. And once it could be inherited, it began to define social class. Kings and rulers quickly recognized the power of these systems and co-opted them for the state. They standardized the units of account, declaring official measures for barley and silver. They fixed these values not to reflect market forces, but to maintain stability and control. Taxes were assessed in these units. Labor obligations were measured in them. Military service was compensated through them. Money became political. But its purpose was never to facilitate trade between ordinary people. Coins would come much, much later, primarily as a way for states to pay soldiers and collect taxes more efficiently. Early money existed to mobilize labor, extract surplus, and maintain order. As debt accumulated, its consequences became severe. When farmers couldn't repay their loans, they didn't just lose their grain, they lost their land. When their land was gone, they pledged their family members as collateral. Debt bondage became common. Entire households were absorbed into the vast economic machinery of the temples and palaces. The system worked until it didn't. As obligations piled up, societies faced deep instability. Too many people were trapped in debt. Too much land was concentrated in the hands of the few. Too many debts were simply unpayable. And this is where Mesopotamia reveals an ancient insight that modern finance often forgets. Debt is powerful, but it's also dangerous. Ancient rulers understood this. Periodically, they would issue sweeping debt cancellations. These weren't moral acts of forgiveness. They were survival strategies. Kings would issue decrees to erase debts, restore land to its original owners, and free debt slaves. They were resetting the entire ledger. This tells us something crucial. Even the earliest financial systems recognized that unchecked debt can destroy a society from within. And now we come to the central twist of this whole story. Money was not created to facilitate exchange. It was created to measure obligation. And obligation was used to enforce power. This reversal reframes everything we think we know about economics. Money was never neutral. It was a social technology designed to structure hierarchy. Once you could quantify obligation, you could weaponize it. And once it was weaponized, it became the backbone of governance. From Mesopotamia, this model of money as debt spread. Empires rose and fell, but the fundamental logic remained the same. Accounting always preceded coinage. Credit always preceded cash. The state defined what money was, demanded it back in the form of taxes, and forced everyone to participate in the system. As I mentioned, coins were introduced not because people demanded them, but because states needed a portable way to pay soldiers and enforce taxation. Markets then followed money, not the other way around. Fast forward through the centuries, and you see the same architecture reappearing in new forms. Medieval Europe relied heavily on credit systems long before coin circulation became widespread. Merchants kept detailed ledgers. The first banks recorded obligations. Kings borrowed heavily from financiers to fund their wars. Debt fueled the ambitions of empires. Modern banking simply perfected this ancient system. Banks don't actually lend out existing money that's sitting in a vault. They create credit by recording it in an account. When you take out a loan, the money appears as numbers on a screen, a digital clay tablet. The vast majority of money today is still just a ledger entry, an electronic record of who owes what to whom. Seen through this historical lens, concepts like inflation become clearer. Inflation isn't just prices going up. It's the expansion of obligations, of debt relative to the real productive capacity of an economy. When the amount of debt in a system grows faster than the resources and goods available, the value of each unit of money erodes. This dynamic existed in Mesopotamia. It existed in Rome, and it absolutely exists today. Central banks adjust interest rates. Governments issue bonds. Financial institutions create credit out of thin air. The system has scaled up dramatically, but its foundation remains unchanged. Those who control the ledger still control the economy. And this is the final powerful reveal. The first debt records in Mesopotamia weren't primitive scribbles. They were sophisticated instruments of power. They introduced the radical idea that value could exist independently of any physical object, that an obligation could bind people across time and generations. That authority could be enforced through simple accounting. Modern finance did not invent these ideas. It inherited them. Understanding this doesn't mean we should reject money. It means we have to see it for what it truly is. Money is not just a neutral medium of exchange. It is a record of obligation, a system of control, and a deeply political instrument. And once you see that, the modern world starts to make a lot more sense. You understand why debt shapes so many lives, why financial crises seem to repeat themselves, why power and wealth concentrate at the top, and why, eventually, resets become inevitable. The clay tablets of Mesopotamia may be silent now, but their logic still governs the global economy. And the true story of money, once you understand it, is no longer comforting, but it is finally honest. Thank you for watching. If this changed the way you see money, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the systems that shape our world. See you next time.